Jodi, thank you so much for joining me today. And also, thank you because you are giving the talk at St. Matthias Online this Sunday, and you are continuing our Honest to God series. And I've got to say, I'm so excited. We're going into a section of the Psalms from Psalm 120 to Psalm 134, which are called the Psalms of Ascent. And I wanted this opportunity as we get into the Psalms as groups to just dig a little deeper with you. And I know that these Psalms, they're not just kind of, nice ancient poetry to you. I know that these are literally words that you cling onto in your faith with all that you're going through personally, and words that bring you constant inspiration and strength. And that's why I'm so excited for you speaking to us on Sunday. But I wanted to ask you, because you start your talk by talking about this kind of three-stage process that God takes us through as we read these Psalms of Ascent. I'm sure there's lots more that God does, but I love these three steps that you draw out. And the first being the importance of entering into God's presence with honesty. And how honesty is consistent with drawing close to God. In fact, it's absolutely essential in terms of drawing close to God. And you talk from Psalm 120, that amazing verse. It says, "I call to you in my distress." But I wanted to just ask you about what really that means for you.
I'm always surprised, Tom, when people tell me that they don't really feel they can tell the Lord how they're really feeling. For me, that's not something I think I've ever struggled with. I've been really happy to tell him when I'm really angry with him, when I'm disappointed with him, when I feel kind of like he's let me down. And I feel the Psalms give you that permission. They, every single scripture is God breathed. His fingerprints are all over it. So therefore there's a reason why it's there. And I think the thing is that, which I'll touch on in my talk, is this thing of our veiled reality versus God's unveiled reality. But our reality is kind of where we start. That's where you start talking. But I think the most important thing with honest worship, and for me, worship being classified as speaking to the Lord realistically, is that you have to consistently do this process of talking to him. And what you start off with, and he's given you permission through the Psalms of Ascent to start off with how you're feeling, what's going on. But there's this consistency of every single day, day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out, which has kind of been the process of my relationship with him. And I remember starting off as a 14-year-old, and as I've told you, I really didn't like the Psalms at all. I actually, I couldn't even understand, I couldn't even reconcile the Psalms of all these promise and hope and things like that to what my reality was, because I struggle with chronic illness. And so actually, which I think is really funny, and I'll kind of go into it, but actually I got wooed in through Isaiah. And I don't know if you've read Isaiah recently. It's not exactly sweetness, light and unicorns. But the Lord really spoke to me. And again, it was through this weeping and gnashing of teeth and all these things, because I felt that was my reality. So I have consistently, I think that is so key. I know for myself that Satan attacks my inconsistencies. So for instance, I was talking to you recently, when I wrote this test felt like a test. When I wrote this talk, I was waiting to go through a series of medical appointments to wait to see kind of what they were going to say. And I'd been through this process before, where initially there was such an incredible element of fear, you know, the what if situation. And I remember walking out of the doctor's rooms and just crying out to the Lord, literally with tears pouring down my face. I mean, these poor people that were walking past me must have thought the most dreadful thing had happened in the world. But saying to the Lord, you promise that I do not have to fear. You promise that I can have peace. So how are you going to do this? Because I'm not feeling peaceful and I'm feeling full of fear. And this whole thing of consistency was what he took me through, funny enough, was this, Jodi, you come to me and you come to me consistently and you process this until the fruit of the Spirit, and one of them is peace, will come upon you. And it was the most incredible journey, and probably the most valuable journey I think maybe the most valuable journey I've ever gone through with the Lord, of, oh, wow, this is a promise, you know, this peace comes and then you have no ability to worry, but you press on until, like, claiming, okay, Lord, I'm going to get into the Word. That for me is it. Get into the Word. I'm going to be talking to you, and then the peace will come. But being really honest, like, I'm really frightened, or I have no joy. You know, that's this whole process of honesty, and is consistent with worship, consistent with drawing close to the Lord.
So I love the sense of, okay, I draw close to God in my distress, but actually that's not just, okay, here I am, Lord, I'm still distressed. What you're saying is there's almost this increased inner resolve to you to keep drawing close until the promises, for example, of the fruit of the Spirit of peace is actually realized in your reality. So there comes this persistence in your faith that the psalm leads you into.
Yeah, 100%. I also noticed that the minute I'm not consistent, so the minute I have a few days off with the Lord, I'm busy doing other things, whatever I'm struggling with, I can now sense it in my spirit. I almost feel like it's this weird feeling of just I lose this inner real calm, I think it is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I've been inconsistent.
Yeah.
And just kind of drawing back in with him, journaling. I love the Word. I mean, he speaks to me in the Word. It's very profoundly.
And I see this in you, Jodi, but it indicates that when you're going through the sorts of experiences that you've spoken about, chronic illness, constant hospital visits or appointments online, that actually faith needs to rise to the consistency of the battle that you're going through, rather than, it's not going to do just to have your little morning quiet time or to just go to church on a Sunday. You then move on through these Psalms of Ascent to talking about shifting your gaze. And I know that's partly what you've been speaking about there. You quote from Psalm 123, I lift my eyes to the Lord. And in some ways, the Psalms of Ascent, the physicality of the people of God walking up the mountain towards the temple in Jerusalem, lifting their eyes, I suppose, from the mess and the grime of the reality of their own lives. And you say something profound, which is who has your focus? Is that the phrase?
Yeah.
Do you want to just unpack that a little bit more?
So I think the most profound thing that the Lord's taught me through this process and through the Psalms is that we start with our gaze on the floor, realistically. We start with what's in front of us, our next step. So whether that's disappointment or even like joy or whatever it is, wherever we're communicating with the Lord. But when our gaze is at the floor, we instantly, and we're talking to him. So I'm talking while I'm walking, but I'm staring at the floor. It means I put the Lord in a position where he is subservient to me almost. But as I walk, so as I do this journey with him, I realize what he does is he is lifting my head. He is like refocusing me. He's reminding me that he is the creator. He is reminding me that he is good, you know, and so he shifts my gaze so that I'm actually looking at him in this position of the sovereign God who is totally in control. And there's no fear, there's no anxiety then, because it's like, oh, he's got it. I mean, that's why I love reading kind of Revelations, when we're reminded, where is God? He's on the throne. You know, it's not like, oh, he got off the throne for a moment. And I think we've just got to be really honest. And I think the Lord's really cool with this. You know, he's happy. I was thinking as a parent, I'd rather my children were talking and slamming doors and, you know, telling me their life's disastrous and everything's going terribly wrong, and they're not talking at all. Because when they're talking or shouting or screaming or whatever it is, or bashing a door, they're still communicating. And why would God be any different? Because at some point they will take a breath and I can start communicating back to them. And I think that's what the Lord just does. He, you know, you start talking, your gaze is shifted down. And sometimes I think we've got to remember that I've realized in my own many times, I think, and especially with the health thing, you look at false saviors. You know, you're looking for someone to have an answer. And, you know, obviously, I mean, I think the medical profession is totally amazing. And yes, they do have a lot of answers for me. But actually, ultimately, look, the Lord is on the throne. He gets the last say. You know, and I think that's quite profound. So he shifts our gaze. And that in itself means that we can get off our own platform.
Yeah. I love that. And the challenge of what are we focusing on? And it takes a certain discipline to, oh gosh, I've just become fixated again upon that thing. Lord, help me to lift my eyes again to you. And so you go through these 2 steps, and then the third step is you talk about simply surrendering, of coming to the point where you are able to worship. And we're not just talking about, you know, sitting in your living room and mumbling Tom Lomax and his team's great songs. You quote from Psalm 134, now praise the Lord, you servants of the Lord who stand in the Lord's house at night, and how this sense of coming into God's presence in worship, which might be in your darkest hour, is an act of surrender. And I love that. And yeah, I'd love you to unpack that.
So I think that the fascinating thing is, so I don't want to give you my whole talk for Sunday, but there is a lovely story in, let me think, I think it's Acts. Is it Acts? Yes, Peter and John coming to the temple. And I love the fact that you had this man who'd been begging forever, and he was looking at the floor, begging, let's face it. And what does Peter say to him? He says, look up at us. We're told that the man gave them his full attention, expecting something from them. And I think the surrendering is when we're finally looking up at God on the throne, we have an expectation, there's a hope. And you are able to surrender because you know he's good. You know you never walk away empty-handed. And you don't have to be in control. You don't have to understand. I mean, it sounds twee just to say that, but I think that's where I've come to in life. And actually, I never ever feel like I have been shortchanged ever. I never felt that I haven't been blessed beyond measure. I don't think, you know that, I don't know, where's that verse that, that he repays us the years the locusts have taken. And I think that that's exactly what happens. You just cannot walk away from him without your hands full of what's important, the spiritual gifts, and therefore you're able to surrender because you're quite happy to.
And you see that so often in the Psalms where David or the psalmist has gone through this process of naming his honesty, of bringing it before God, of even asking tough questions to the Lord. And yet so often the Psalms end with, yet I will praise you. And you get that almost breakthrough of, okay, I don't have the whole perspective, and I'm just a mortal person, and as I focus on this King who's on the throne, actually I need to surrender now and say, I'll praise you, Lord God.
I think that's it. You don't always get the answers. I mean, Job is a classic one. Eventually he asks a lot of questions, and eventually the way the Lord answers is like, were you there when I created? Where were you when I did these things? And so this whole kind of awe of like realizing who God is and how he does care for us so profoundly. We're precious to him and he's good. That it actually becomes irrelevant. What the why to your question.
And so often the answer is be in my presence. That is what you need. Jodi, thank you so much, and we can't wait for Sunday, but it's been wonderful to chat to you today.